Chuck Schumer comes out and says this speech on the Senate floor, scolding Netanyahu, basically saying there needs to be new elections so we can get Israel can chart a new way forward. There needs to be elections, and that Netanyahu is an obstacle to peace. That's the phrase that they're attacking him on. So Chuck Schumer, who is the top-ranking Jewish elected official, is what they keep saying. To me, that's Anthony Blinken. Some reason they're saying the senator is above him. Anthony Blinken is the one that's really running shit. But anyway, here's the headline: Chuck Schumer's Senate speech and the U.S.-Israeli final solution in Gaza. So let's read a little bit from this, and then we're going to get to Netanyahu's reaction, and that's video. So let's read this a little bit of this article, and then, like I said, we're going to get to Netanyahu. Now, my eyes a little bit chance to rest. Let's see how we go here. The statements by Biden and Schumer are political ploys. They're talking about, okay, so let me say this. Chuck Schumer makes his speech. GOP pull their hair out. Netanyahu responds. But Joe Biden is asked, what do you think of that speech? And he says it's a good speech. And a lot of people, agree with that sentiment. He doesn't say he does, but that is Joe Biden's reaction. So when the article says this part, that's what they're talking about. It's saying the statements by Biden and Schumer's statement on the Senate floor and Biden's reaction to that, those are political ploys whose purpose is to cover up the fact that the administration is deeply complicit with the Gaza genocide, which is overwhelmingly opposed by the vast majority of the world's population. Despite their criticisms of Netanyahu's policies, and that's Schumer and Biden, both Schumer and the White House made it clear that their statements did not reflect any change in U.S. policy. Both of them made it clear. Policy's not changing. We're just saying some shit to fool some people. And then they go, the U.S. would continue to provide weapons to Israel without any conditions, U.S. officials stressed. The speech was closely coordinated. Now, they're talking about Chuck Schumer's speech. Chuck Schumer's speech was closely coordinated with the White House, with Biden saying Schumer had contacted my senior staff. Biden added it was a good speech, which expressed serious concerns shared by many Americans. In the course of his remarks, Schumer admitted for the first time that the members of the Israeli government have stated their intentions to carry out the ethnic cleansing of the population of Gaza. Israeli Foreign Minister, I'm not even going to try, and Israeli Defense Minister Ben Gvir, I think that's how you say his, are clear in their desire to displace Palestinians from their homes and replace them with Israeli settlers, Schumer said. This is Schumer saying this. These statements are a staggering self-indictment. Israeli officials called for the immigration of Gaza Arabs to the countries of the world on November 14th, the same day that Schumer was a headline speaker at the March for Israel. Remember that Washington, D.C., when they thought that the protest was going to be a one-time thing for pro-Palestinian, so they had a pro-Israel one. Schumer spoke there on that day. To the chance of no ceasefire, Schumer told Israel, "We stand with you. We will not rest until you get the assistance you need." He implied that left-wing opposition to the Gaza genocide was anti-Semitic. On that day, the death toll from Israel's onslaught on Gaza stood at 11.5 thousand. Since then, a further 20,000 Palestinian men, women, and children have been killed. Schumer and the White House provided over 100 arms transfers totaling billions of dollars to fund and arm a government that had publicly declared its intent to ethnically cleanse the population of 2 million people. It is time to call things by their right name. The Netanyahu government is carrying out the final solution of the Palestinian problem. Regardless of the occasional and cynical finger wagging in Washington, it is doing so with the support of the Biden administration and both political parties in the United States. So, yeah. All right. So that article sums up what the purpose of the Chuck Schumer speech was about. It sums up the purpose. It was highly coordinated with the White House. So they knew exactly what he was going to say. This is all a dance to pretend like they're against Netanyahu. How can you come to a Jesus moment with Netanyahu at the same time send him 100 secret weapons sales? Those two things don't go together. They're incompatible. What's the next part? Okay, so the next part, Netanyahu, he goes on here and is going to respond to Chuck Schumer's speech. So let's listen to this report.
Here with me now is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's start with that potential deal, sir. 100 hostages are still being held by Hamas. You're sending that negotiating team to Qatar in the coming days to talk about a potential deal, free hostages in exchange for a 6-week pause in fighting. As you know, Hamas is demanding the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for roughly 40 female hostages. Are you open to that? Are you close to a deal?
Well, time will tell, but Hamas's outlandish demands, and I'm not itemizing every one of them now, makes that deal a lot more difficult, but we're going to keep on trying because we want those hostages back. We understand also that the one thing that gets Hamas to give them is to give these hostages to us is the continued military pressure that we're applying there.
To continue
we're going to continue military pressure, and we're going to continue to try to get those hostages out. And we've succeeded already in bringing half of them out. I hope we continue along that same course.
Let's talk about what happened here in the U.S. this week. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer gave a pivotal speech and said, you have lost your way, and called you an obstacle to peace. Take a listen.
The Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. And I believe that holding a new election, once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future.
Chuck Schumer is the highest-ranking Jewish elected official here in America, a staunch supporter of Israel. What's your response?
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own. We're not a banana republic.
This is such a non-thing, how these pseudo-democracy get so offended by civility. You notice how the fights between the ruling class is all about civility. There's nothing tangible difference. It's like, oh, this is totally inappropriate to be making comments, to be talking. It's all about crossing these imaginary etiquette lines, and when you do, you have a reaction to that. It's not at all anything tangible, but that's what he's saying. You shouldn't say anything, and this is largely what a lot of GOP, a lot of conservative reaction. Hopefully I'll get to that.
Here in America, a staunch supporter of Israel. What's your response?
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own. We're not a banana republic. I think the only government that we should be working on to bring down now is the terrorist tyranny in Gaza, the Hamas tyranny that murdered over 1,000 Israelis, including some dozens of Americans, and is holding Americans and Israelis hostage. That's what we should be focused on. And as far as what Senator Schumer said, the majority of Israelis support our governments. 82% of Americans support Israel instead of Hamas, but the majority of Israelis support the policies that we're leading. Go into Rafah, destroy the remaining Hamas terrorist battalions, make sure that we don't put into Gaza, instead of Hamas, the Palestinian Authority that educates their children towards terrorism and the annihilation of Israel, and also an enormous majority here, including 99 Knesset members to 9, oppose the idea of ramming down a Palestinian state down our throats.
I want to get to some
the
of those
majority of
polls.
Israelis.
So he's trying to squeeze in as much propaganda as he can, as if anybody here cared. Like, this guy has a low approval rating, lower than Nancy Pelosi, lower than, I can't even think of a person. It's lower than the overall Congress. So it's just an awkward position, but he's here trying to fit in as much nonsense lies, Israeli lies, as he can, and she's trying to move on. And this is an ally. He's like, okay, listen, bro, I'm with you, but this is too much. Let's move on to the next thing.
This is a wake-up call to Senator Schumer. The majority of Israelis support the policies of my government. It's not a fringe government. It represents the policies supported by the majority of the people. If Senator Schumer opposes these policies, he's not opposing me. He's opposing the people of Israel.
Okay, I'm going to get to some of the polls that you cited in one moment, but I just want to make sure that our viewers understand that Chuck Schumer gave the big speech, but he has support in many ways from the President of the United States. President Biden is a self-described Zionist. Even he is starting to distance himself from the way you are handling the war. He called what Schumer said a good speech. He said that he shared the concern of many Americans. They aren't criticizing Israel. They're criticizing you and your right-wing coalition.
Dana, there's a fallacy that is being perpetrated here. And you should take polls, you'll have your own polls, and check whether the people of Israel support the policies that I'm being criticized for. That is, supporting the policies of going into Rafah, destroying a quarter of the remaining Hamas terrorist army. That's like leaving a quarter of the Nazi terrorist army in Germany and saying, no, we're not going to finish the last quarter, and we're not going into Berlin. Most Israelis overwhelmingly support the position that we have to go in. They oppose the idea of ramming down a two-state solution or a terrorist state against their will, because they think that this will endanger Israel's future. They support.
And he's right. All of what he's saying as far as the government, yes. Israel, this country full of Zionists, yes. They have been, and I've covered this many times, Jewish people who, or Israelis, I should say, not Jewish people, but Israelis who were brought up a certain way, and then they came to find out the truth, and they were shocked how they figured out that they were getting indoctrinated with lies. So why wouldn't the people believe to commit a genocide if that's that's the whole culture, that's how they've been raised? So anytime they have these polls where they're saying, well, the polls say this about immigration, what do you expect the polls to say about immigration when you sell brown fear to white people who have been indoctrinated with a country that, I don't think it's disputable that it's began its origins being racist against the indigenous people, enslaved people. That's the DNA. So, but anyway, let's not get off topic. Let's stay on topic. Let's listen more to what Netanyahu says here.
Those policies that I'm putting forward, and to present that as something that is, I'm an outlier, it doesn't represent the majority of the people of Israel, is simply a fallacy. And I'll tell you the other fallacy is, they're saying, well, most Palestinians don't support the Hamas massacre. In fact, 85% of the Palestinians do support, unfortunately, the Hamas massacre. So they've got two fallacies here, and you can readily check that. The majority of Israelis support the
So he's saying that it's bad that the majority of Palestinians support the military attack that Hamas pulled off on October 7th. But the support for the genocidal campaign, that is good. One is good and one is bad, but it's certainly not the one you're saying, sir. He's saying that high support by Hamas is bad, but the high support of the genocide by Israelis is good.
policies that I have on prosecuting the war, which is what I'm being criticized for.
Well,
So it's not just me. It's the people of Israel who believe that we have to have this resolute victory to assure a future.
I think that what you're being criticized for is not prosecuting the war. It's the way that you're prosecuting the war. So I'm going to get to that in 1 minute. But I just want to add a little bit of sort of context to the way that the Biden administration is pushing back. Another way is that the U.S. intelligence community warned that, quote, distrust of Netanyahu's ability to rule has deepened and broadened across the public. And then back to the polls, you're talking about support for the idea of toppling Hamas. That makes perfect sense. There were other polls in Israel, 3 major Israeli television stations that said what Israelis also support are early elections. That's what I really want to focus on here is Senator Schumer not calling to sort of topple the government, but specifically says, when the war winds down, will you commit to calling new elections? That's my question. Will you?
Dana, 2/3. First of all, what you said is wrong. The vast majority of Israelis oppose early elections until the war doesn't end. We've just had many polls on that. Look, a lot of the polls are twisted.
Channel 12 says
guided.
He says, so he says the polls are lies, that those are wrongs, this and this, and then he says, then he tries to go in, the polls are all made up. He says 2 different things within 3 seconds of each other. Let me see if I can get it again.
Are twisted.
Channel 12 says,
okay, let's see if I can get it again. I'm gonna rewind it back here.
Said is wrong. The vast majority of Israelis oppose early elections until the war doesn't end. We've just had many polls on that. Look, a lot of the polls are twisted.
Channel 12 says, Channel 12 says 64% of Israelis support early elections.
But all polls show that's not. No, I'm afraid that they asked them the question, do you support it during the war? And they said no.
But that's not what Schumer is calling for. He's calling for new elections when the war winds down.
Well, we'll see when we win the war. And until we win the war, I think Israelis understand that if we were to have elections now, before the war is won, resoundingly won, we would have at least 6 months of national paralysis, which means we would lose the war. If we don't win the war, we lose the war. And that would be not only a defeat for Israel, but a defeat for America too, because our victory is your victory. We're fighting these barbarians that are not merely threatening the survival of Israel,
when the war winds down.
Everything that we hold dear together.
Will you commit to new elections when the war winds down?
I think that's something for the Israeli public to decide, but it's not something. No, look, that's something for the Israeli people to decide. I think it's ridiculous to talk about it. It's like after 9/11, after 9/11, you're in the midst of fighting the war.
Yeah, our elections, nothing happened with our elections. I don't understand. Why do they have to announce elections? Why don't you have just a normal process? Why isn't that just happening? Why are you pausing elections? That's weird. How is that democracy? And you're still calling Israel a democracy? You're pausing elections? They only elected you for the term that they agreed upon before you took office. Now you just say, I'm gonna go bypass this because of emergency reasons. When the election, because the reason you keep elections, because what if the people want to go in a different direction than the current people in office executing whatever the war plan is? You want to have elections because if the people want to go a different direction, they would elect somebody else. If they want to say, hey, we like what you're doing already, then it reinforces the person who's already in office. So this sounds very much like Ukraine. the clown show that's over there at Ukraine.
Everything that we hold dear together.
Will you commit to new elections when
I
the
think
war
that's
winds down?
something for the Israeli public to decide. But it's not something. No, it's look, that's something for the Israeli people to decide. I think it's ridiculous to talk about it. It's like after 9/11.
Now he's mad.
You know, after 9/11, you're in the midst of fighting the war against Al Qaeda, and an Israeli would say, you know what we need now is either new elections in the U.S. or if your system doesn't allow, then President Bush should resign and we should have an alternative leader. You don't do that.
Well, let's
you don't
talk
do that
about
to,
why.
A sister democracy, to an ally. You don't talk about that. What you do talk about is how do we help you defeat what President Biden called sheer evil. You don't just stop after you destroyed 80% of sheer evil. You
Right.
destroy
So-
100% of sheer evil.
She's not buying any of that. She's like, yeah. Let's move on. She wasn't buying any of that, and that was the end of their clip. They clipped that. That wasn't a special edit. That's directly from CNN. So they clipped it at that point. But you see his reaction and the pushback. Now, understand, this is all a dance. He knows he's to come on TV and pretend like he's getting scolded by American media. That plays well here. This is all a dance that he is perfectly fine participating in. Like he's coming on and getting attacked by a reporter and he's getting mad. Like this is all for show. Don't buy into it.